Hello, welcome to my three-part video series that summarizes my explanation for what I believe causes chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia syndrome. Fibromyalgia syndrome and chronic fatigue syndrome are very closely related. In fact, I believe they are actually expressions of the same underlying dysfunction. Other words like myalgic encephalomyelitis, CFIDS, and post-viral fatigue syndrome are also used. For now, let's call all of these CFS just to make it easier. Perhaps you've seen some of my other videos where I discussed the different theories regarding what causes CFS. Undoubtedly, you've already done a lot of research yourself, so a lot of what you hear in these videos may be familiar to you already. In order to get the most out of these videos, I would suggest that you make a decision to put any skepticism on hold until you have all of the information, even if you feel like you've heard it all before. Because having heard a part of something before, or having understood it and having applied it successfully, are all different things. So depending on your background or experience, you may find that this is all new and somewhat overwhelming, or you may find that you've already heard about many parts of the information presented. And you may even have already tried a lot of strategies or treatments based on aspects of what we're talking about here with varying success. The important thing to point out is that you can be doing 95% of things right, but unless you get that final 5%, success can actually elude you. And that 5% is probably different for everyone. So in the first half of my book, CFS Unraveled, I actually give detail on how I arrived at my understanding and how I accumulated evidence to give you the conviction that the explanation is absolutely correct. Whilst the second part focuses on recovery planning, it also gives you more insight into the pathogenesis of this complex syndrome. The book basically gives you a framework that brings the merit of all these different theories all together. So whilst I obviously can't include all the information in the short video series, I want to make sure that you get at least the overview of what we're talking about. The important thing to note is that the explanation is a hypothesis. It's not been proven. Although in much scientific literature, the cause of the underlying reason for chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia are casually referred to as well understood fact. So it seems a little strange that on the one hand, people act like, oh, we all know it. And on the other hand, the vast majority of people out there are like, saying it's a mystery, and there's still so much discussion and controversy around the cause. Whilst what causes CFS and fibromyalgia might be regarded as self-evident or accepted, it hasn't been actually proven, as far as I know anyway. But ask yourself, how do you actually prove such any hypothesis? After all, if it's based on what is already known in physiology and based on observed dysfunction, how do you prove the connections that are, either known or obviously implied or observed? The reason why I ask this is because you have to ask yourself, well, what do you actually need to know in order to feel confident that the explanation is actually valid and not just another theory? So I personally actually looked at several criteria, and there were these. Does it explain the symptoms? Does it explain why certain treatments work? Does it explain why certain treatments don't work? Does it explain why people recover despite using different treatments? Does it explain how people get sick in different ways? Okay, so let me start by making a glaringly obvious observation. In chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia syndrome, just about everything is out of whack. There are problems with various hormone levels, adrenal hormones, thyroid hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, growth hormone, just about all of the hormones. There are problems with neurotransmitters. There are bowel dysfunctions. There's immune system dysfunction, cardiovascular dysfunction. And obviously there's also metabolic dysfunction, which means, you've got problems creating energy. There is poor liver function. And there's also neurological dysfunctions. That's a lot of dysfunctions. So what could possibly be causing so many different dysfunctions? It's almost a case of what's actually working correctly rather than what's not working correctly. And this is your biggest clue as to the cause of CFS. Normally, if you have an illness, you have a certain symptom or group of symptoms, and we can do a medical test which reveals a dysfunction somewhere in your body. And then you probably receive an appropriate diagnosis and treatment. However, in chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, you experience multiple disorders. This is what doctors call comorbidity. So clearly, we should ask ourselves this question: what affects every system in the body? The answer is the autonomic nervous system. Now, this may already sound familiar to you, similar to some other information you've heard. There are various authors out there that are saying CFS is a result of a dysregulated HPA axis that produces the wrong amounts of adrenal hormone. Or sometimes they say that your fight or flight response is dysregulated. But that is only a small part of the autonomic nervous system. Let me call it the ANS from here on. Now, the ANS directly influences all the major systems in your body. So you can see it affects the digestive system, the endocrine system, the nervous system, the circulatory system, which obviously includes the heart. It includes the respiratory system, the urinary system, and reproductive and other systems. The HPA axis I just mentioned is only a small part of the endocrine system. It's how adrenal hormones such as cortisol are produced in the adrenal cortex above your kidneys. Now, cortisol is a very powerful and important hormone that's chiefly involved in immune system control, breaking down and mobilizing tissues, making glucose, blood sugar available, and also some other functions involved in the fight or flight response. Now, the adrenals are actually stimulated by the pituitary gland, which in turn is stimulated by the hypothalamus. So that's where the term comes from, HPA. Now, some people suggest that cortisol is low in CFS sufferers, which explains the symptoms of fatigue as well as many others. This is often described as adrenal fatigue or subclinical hypoadrenia, and suggests that adrenal glands are unable to produce adequate hormone levels and need to be rejuvenated. And this gives rise to adrenal fatigue theory for CFS and treating CFS with various products to rebuild the adrenal glands or even replace the hormone directly, as some doctors try to do. Now, some people suggest the opposite, like you always expect in CFS. So they suggest that adrenal levels are too high, which would explain the depressed immune system and many other problems. Now, they suggest that the reason for why they're too high is the control mechanism. So that's the H and the P part of the HPA axis. And some people go further to integrate other parts of the limbic brain, such as the amygdala. So why is there such a problem? I mean, this is the question we really have to ask. And various researchers and authors have come up with a whole bunch of reasons. So some people suggest it has to do with things like suppressed emotions. Some people say that it's due to focusing on your symptoms. Some people say that it's due to neuroassociative conditioning. Some people say it's just due to the mysterious force of CFS and it can't be explained. So there's a lot of reasons why someone comes out there with an explanation or theory of why this is happening. And some people have suggested that we go from like high adrenal levels down to lower adrenal levels, which perhaps makes some sense. But if you consider fibromyalgia in particular, there's a whole bunch of other symptoms that are not fully explained by these ideas alone. And reason being is that we're looking at the ANS, the autonomic nervous system, a little bit simplistically here. There's actually much more going on. So if we look at the ANS, we can simplify it and split it into three branches: the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, and the enteric nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is responsible for fight or flight, so getting all revved up, releasing lots of cortisol. And the parasympathetic is to do the opposite. It's to reduce your arousal and prepare yourself for rest and digest. The enteric nervous system is a complex set of nerves to regulate the activity of the digestive system. But the important thing to realize is that the autonomic nervous system does not just influence the body via the control of hormones, such as cortisol, aldosterone, or adrenaline, noradrenaline, or thyroid hormone. No, it actually primarily uses nerve fibers. So the adrenal hormone control is only one small part of the ANS. It's one part of the sympathetic nervous system. So there's two branches in the sympathetic nervous system. Anyway, getting back to the different systems affected by the ANS. The digestive dysfunction and any cardiovascular dysfunction can be directly attributed to the ANS dysfunction. No doubt you've already known about racing heartbeats or butterflies in your stomach when you feel nervous. So that part can already be very easily linked directly to the ANS. You need to realize that the ANS is just part of the central nervous system. So many areas of the brain are affected, from the brainstem to the limbic brain to other parts of the brain. Now that means that areas such as the thalamus that are central to pain perception are also involved. So when it comes to fibromyalgia pain, for instance, many people often look at the source of the pain in fibromyalgia. And look, whilst there's undoubtedly some pain due to inflammation and perhaps a couple of other factors, it's clear to me that the real problem is with the perception of pain. Now, by perception, I don't mean how you as an individual handle pain or how tough you are or anything like that. What I'm really talking about is what is happening neurologically. So instead of looking for what is sending the pain signal down the nerve fiber towards the central nervous system, we should really be looking at what's actually happening in the nervous system itself, where the signals are received. And some of this is already happening now with investigations of high substance P levels in the cerebrospinal fluid of CFS sufferers, and also by science gaining a deeper understanding of how pain perception actually works. However, let's get back to what we talked about before, about cortisol. Is cortisol too high? Is it too low? It's an interesting question, because cortisol dysregulation can explain immune system dysfunction as well as problems with energy production. Not only is the endocrine function directly related to energy levels with hormones like cortisol, as well as thyroid hormone and insulin, but secondary dysfunctions in your mitochondria, which is where energy is produced in your cells, are also linked to stress hormones. I actually believe that both theories are actually right, sort of anyway. Let me make 2 points here. One, I actually believe that cortisol levels have a lot greater impact on CFS sufferers, and that this is due to changes in cortisol receptors. And the other point I'd really like to make is that cortisol is not as low as it appears. In fact, despite what we can measure, in fact, there's really often massive off-the-chart cortisol surges that are experienced, and these are often the things that keep you up at night and leave you like you've got that trapped energy in your body, you know, where you just want to twitch and move, that type of feeling. But just looking at hormones alone isn't enough. It's actually looking at the nervous system, how that functions, because that is really a big important part of CFS. As again a fuller understanding of how CFS works, you can start to see all the different connections to all of your symptoms and dysfunctions, including some of the stranger dysfunctions, such as the hypersensitivities and some of the other neurological dysfunctions. So it starts to make sense. I hope that this information so far is enough to help you see the link between the ANS and your symptoms. You can always review the available literature on the internet or read CFS Unraveled for more details and more of these connections. Remember, when we looked originally at what we need in order to be sure to have a correct working theory of what causes CFS, we needed more than just making links between dysfunctions and observed symptoms. Although obviously what we see here is already pretty compelling, especially when you study it in a great deal of detail. What I personally found most compelling is how the ANS dysfunction explains the different ways people get sick, as well as different ways they recover. The real question I hope you're asking yourself is, why is this dysfunction occurring? And how and where is the ANS regulated? Because these are important questions to ask yourself if you wish to recover. We will consider this in the next video and consider the role of the locus coeruleus in CFS.